I am Laura, a 35-year-old teacher from Savannah, Georgia. For most of my life, I believed my family was solid, grounded in trust, love, and mutual respect. But sometimes, the truth hides beneath the surface, waiting to shatter the very foundation you stand on. What I discovered about my parents turned my world upside down, and it all started with something I thought would secure my daughter Lily's college fund. I always dreamed of giving Lily the opportunities I never had. When she was born, I started saving little by little, knowing college costs could crush a family if you're not prepared. Years of sacrifice, quiet budgeting, skipped vacations, all for that one dream, Lily's education. I never imagined that dream would be stolen from right under my nose, but it was. One afternoon, while going through some paperwork, I noticed the college fund account looked off. The numbers didn't add up. My heart raced. I checked again and again, hoping it was just a mistake. But no, the money was gone, and not just a little, a large chunk of it. Panic tightened its grip on me. I knew exactly what this meant. My parents had been using Lily's college fund to cover their gambling debts. The shock felt like a punch to the gut. How could they betray me like this? How could they take what was meant to secure my daughter's future and throw it away on a reckless addiction? My mind spun with anger, disappointment, and a deep sadness that felt impossible to swallow. I sat alone in my kitchen, the weight of betrayal settling over me like a storm cloud. The people I trusted most, the ones who should be pillars of support, had become the very threat to my child's future. And worse, they didn't even have the courage to admit it. I knew I couldn't keep this buried. I needed to confront them to make them understand the damage they'd caused, not just to the money, but to the trust that holds a family together. But I also knew this wasn't just about money. This was about addiction, about responsibility, and about fighting for what's right. With the help of my aunt, someone who has always stood by me, I arranged a family meeting. It wasn't going to be easy. I was prepared for anger denial, maybe even tears, but I was determined to make them face the consequences. When the day came, the air was thick with tension. I looked into their eyes, searching for any sign of remorse. My voice was steady but fierce as I told them I wanted the money back. No more lies, no more excuses. I was done watching my daughter's future get gambled away. To my surprise, the shame hit them harder than any words I could say. My story didn't stay within those four walls. With their permission, or maybe out of desperation, I shared the truth on a local social media page where neighbors and friends could see. The reaction was immediate. Suddenly, my parents weren't just hiding behind closed doors. The community was watching. The shame was unbearable for them. Slowly, they began to make amends, returning the stolen money piece by piece. But the damage ran deeper than dollars and cents. I realized Lily needed protection, not just from financial loss, but from the emotional fallout of her grandparents' addiction. So I set up a new secure fund for Lily's college one that no one but me could touch. I made a promise to her that no matter what storms we faced, I would shield her future. This ordeal was far from over. The gambling problem wasn't just a phase or a mistake. It was an illness that required help. Watching my parents finally agree to therapy was a bittersweet victory. It meant admitting defeat, but also choosing to fight for recovery. I'm sharing this story now because it's not just mine. It's a warning, a call to action for families like mine. Addiction hides in plain sight, and sometimes the hardest battles are fought within the people you love most. But what happens when love and betrayal collide? How do you rebuild trust when it feels like everything's been broken? And can forgiveness find a place in the shadow of shattered dreams? This is just the beginning. The days after the confrontation felt surreal, as if I was walking through a fog that refused to lift. I had expected anger, resentment, maybe even silence from my parents, but the truth was far more complex. The look in their eyes haunted guilty broken cut, deeper than any words could. Watching them unravel piece by piece was like witnessing a slow-motion collapse of everything I thought I knew. I kept replaying that family meeting over and over in my mind. The moment when I laid the facts bare, the weight of disappointment hanging in the room like thick smoke. My voice trembled just enough to show the hurt beneath the resolve. I remember saying, "This isn't just about money, it's about trust. It's about the future you stole from my daughter." And yet the silence that followed was louder than any argument. My mother looked away, tears threatening to spill, while my father's hands shook on the table. I saw the shame they'd been carrying, hidden beneath their bravado and empty promises. That shame had kept them trapped in their cycle of gambling and lies. But now it was exposing cracks I never dared to look for before. In the days that followed, I found myself caught between relief and anxiety. Relief that they were finally acknowledging their problem, but anxiety about the road ahead. Could therapy really fix years of deception and betrayal? Could a family torn by addiction ever truly heal? At home, Lily's laughter became my anchor. She was blissfully unaware of the storm raging beneath the surface. I wanted to shield her from the heartbreak, from the fear that her grandparents, people she adored, had let her down in a way no child should ever experience. But the truth hung over me like a shadow, whispering doubts and fears. Every time I looked at her, I felt a fierce protectiveness. I had to be strong for her. I set up the new college fund with painstaking care, double-locking the accounts, creating layers of protection no one could penetrate. It was my way of reclaiming control, of turning the pain into something constructive. Still, nights were the hardest. Alone in my room, I'd lie awake wrestling with a mix of emotions, betrayal, sorrow, but also a flicker of hope. I kept asking myself, what would Lily think if she ever found out? Would she understand the mess adults sometimes make? Or would she feel the sting of abandonment and distrust? I wanted to believe that healing was possible, that this fracture in our family could somehow be mended. But some days, it felt like I was clutching at smoke. My aunt, who had been my steady support through all this, reminded me gently one afternoon, "Laura, healing takes time. And it's not a straight path. You're doing the right thing by standing firm and protecting Lily." Her words gave me strength, but I knew the hardest battles were still ahead, not just with my parents, but within myself. Could I forgive? Could I let go of the resentment without losing myself? Could I trust again? Meanwhile, my parents began attending therapy sessions. I was told it was a slow process, one filled with setbacks and small victories. But I couldn't help but watch from a distance, feeling a mix of skepticism and cautious optimism. The addiction had run so deep, it wasn't something fixed with a few meetings or apologies. One afternoon, my father called me. His voice was shaky, but honest. "Laura, I'm sorry for everything. We're trying. I want you to know that." Hearing the vulnerability in his voice stirred something inside me. Pain, yes, but also a glimmer of hope. Still, I held my guard. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. The trust I'd lost couldn't be rebuilt overnight. It had to be earned step by painful step. At school, I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out the turmoil at home. But every parent-teacher meeting, every quiet moment, my mind wandered back to Lily, to her future. I found myself daydreaming about the college she'd attend, the career she'd build, the life she deserved, one untouched by the shadows of addiction. Yet I couldn't escape the creeping fear. What if this relapse happened again? What if my parents fell back into old habits? The thought kept me awake more nights than I cared to admit. Social media had been a double-edged sword. Sharing our story publicly had brought community support messages of encouragement, stories of others fighting similar battles. But it also exposed our family's pain to the world. Some comments were harsh, judgmental, and that stung deeply. It made me question how much of my private life should be public. Despite all this, I was determined to turn pain into purpose. I started researching addiction, attending support groups for families of gamblers, connecting with others who understood the complicated dance of love, betrayal, and hope. Each story I heard echoed my own proof that I wasn't alone. And then came a moment I wasn't prepared for. Lily, in her quiet, innocent way, asked me a question that pierced my heart. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa want to help me with college anymore?" Her words hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament, threatening to shatter under the weight of my silence. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words to protect her innocence while not lying. How do you explain addiction to a child without making her feel scared or abandoned? I knelt down beside her, taking her small hands in mine, and said, "Sometimes people make mistakes, honey. But I promise I'm doing everything I can to make sure you have the best future possible." She looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, and I vowed silently that no matter what, I would be the shield that kept her safe. I would fight harder than ever before, not just for the money, but for her peace, her dreams, her hope. But even as I made that promise, I knew this was only the beginning. The ripples from this betrayal were still spreading, touching parts of our lives I hadn't yet seen. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional landmines and hard truths. Could my parents truly change? Would our family survive the fractures? And most importantly, could I find forgiveness in a heart shattered by betrayal? These questions echoed in my mind as I prepared for the next chapter 1, where I would have to confront not only my parents' demons, but my own fears and doubts. The journey was far from over, and in the silence of the night, when the world felt heavy and my heart heavy with grief and hope, I realized this story. Our story was still being written. What happens when the people you love most become the source of your deepest pain? How do you hold on to hope when trust feels like a distant memory? The answers weren't clear yet, but I was ready to face them, because for Lily and for myself, giving up was never an option. The weight of those questions about forgiveness, about change, about the future, pressed down on me with relentless force. Every day felt like walking on thin ice, fragile and uncertain. The cracks beneath my feet weren't just in my parents' lives, but in my own heart as well. How could I rebuild trust that had been shattered so brutally? Could love survive such a deep betrayal? After that conversation with Lily, I found myself pulled between two worlds, the innocence of her childhood and the harsh reality creeping into our family life. I wanted to shield her completely, to wrap her in a cocoon of safety and warmth, but I knew I couldn't protect her from everything. The truth, after all, has a way of finding you, no matter how tightly you try to hold it back. Some nights, I'd sit alone in the dark, my thoughts a tangled mess. Memories of my parents' smiles, their comforting presence when I was a child, clashed violently with the images of their desperate, secretive actions. It felt like I was mourning two people at once, the loving mother and father I once knew, and the flawed, struggling individuals they had become. Therapy sessions had begun, but I was skeptical. Change doesn't come easy, especially when addiction has woven itself into the fabric of your being. My parents showed up, yes, but was it out of genuine desire to heal, or just to avoid further shame? The line blurred, and I found myself questioning everything. One afternoon, my father called again. This time, his voice was quieter, almost defeated. "Laura, I want to be better for you, for Lily, for your mother. I know I messed up. I don't know how to fix this." Hearing the vulnerability in his words stirred something inside me. Pain, yes, but also a flicker of hope. It was the first time I sensed real remorse, not just regret for being caught. Yet I wasn't ready to let my guard down. Forgiveness had to be earned, not given freely. Meanwhile, life at home was a balancing act. I juggled teaching, parenting, and the heavy emotional burden of our family's crisis. Lily's laughter and innocence were a balm to my weary soul, but I could see the shadows sometimes flickering in her eyes, questions she couldn't yet voice. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down with my aunt. She looked at me with a knowing expression and said, "Laura, you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. But remember, healing is not a straight road. There will be setbacks. You have to take care of yourself too." Her words hit me hard. In the storm of protecting others, I'd almost forgotten to protect myself. The nights of tears, the endless questions, the gnawing anxiety, they were all chipping away at my own resilience. I realized then that for our family to survive, I needed to find strength, not just for Lily, but for me. I started attending support groups, seeking out others who understood the painful intersection of love and addiction. Hearing their stories, sharing my own, gave me a strange sense of comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. Yet the hardest moment came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Lily found a letter in the mail, an official notice that the college fund had been frozen, pending investigation. Panic welled up inside me. The money was there, but it was tied up in legal battles and paperwork. Our fight was far from over. I sat Lily down and tried to explain as gently as I could. "Sweetheart, sometimes things don't go as planned, but Mommy's working hard to fix it." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I can't go to college?" The ache in my chest was unbearable. I held her close, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. At that moment, I understood something profoundly. This wasn't just about money or betrayal anymore. It was about hope, hope for a future that felt uncertain and fragile. It was about fighting for dreams that addiction and mistakes threatened to steal away. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the legal fight, working with lawyers, gathering evidence, and preparing for the possibility that my parents might not cooperate fully. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but I refused to give up. Through it all, the therapy sessions continued. My parents showed up sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with tears. I saw glimpses of the people they could be, the people I once knew. But I also saw the depth of their struggle, the grip addiction still held. One day, after a particularly difficult session, my mother reached out to me. Her voice was raw. "Laura, I'm so sorry for the pain we caused. I don't want to lose my family." Her words stirred a tumult of emotions, anger, forgiveness, sadness, all swirling together. I wanted to believe her, but the scars ran deep. I knew this story wasn't about a neat ending or quick fixes. It was messy, painful, and real, and it was far from over. As I looked ahead, I realized that healing would require more than just money returned or therapy attended. It would require courage from all of us to face the darkness, to rebuild trust brick by brick, and to find a way forward, even when the path seemed impossible. For Lily, for my parents, and for myself, the fight would continue. And I was ready to face whatever came next, holding on to hope with every fragile breath. The story was still unfolding, and I knew I would need every ounce of strength to see it through. The slow grinding wheels of change turned in ways I hadn't anticipated. As my parents trudged through the labyrinth of therapy, their revelations spilled over into the fragile spaces of our lives, spaces I'd once thought secure, now exposed and raw. I found myself wrestling not just with their faults, but with my own, my anger, my pain, my unspoken fears. Each therapy update felt like a double-edged sword, progress mingled with setbacks, hope shadowed by doubt. It was as if we were all trapped in a dance, hesitant and uncertain, stepping on each other's toes as we tried to find a new rhythm. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice trembled a mixture of exhaustion and sincerity. "Laura, I've started attending a support group for gambling addiction. It's scary, but it's helping me see things clearly. I want to fix this for you, for Lily." I wanted to believe her words with every fiber of my being, yet beneath my hope lay the brittle shards of mistrust. Years of lies don't dissolve with promises alone. Meanwhile, the legal battle to reclaim Lily's stolen college fund dragged on. Every phone call with the lawyer was a fresh reminder of how deeply the damage had cut. The paperwork, the hearings, it was a constant reminder that what was taken could not simply be returned with a handshake. At home, I threw myself into protecting Lily's world. I watched her growing confidence, her bright curiosity, and her laughter that cut through the darkness. She deserved a future untouched by our family's shadows, and I was determined to build that for her, even if it meant standing alone. But there were nights when the weight of it all crushed me. Nights when I would stare at the ceiling, tears falling silently, wondering if I was strong enough to carry this burden forever. Would the pain ever lessen? Could forgiveness grow in the soil of betrayal? It was during one of these sleepless nights that I found myself scrolling through the support group's forum. Stories flooded in stories of addiction, of heartbreak, of redemption. I read about parents who had fallen into the same trap, children left to pick up the pieces, I read about families who had healed slowly but surely. Those stories were both balm and knife. They reminded me that our journey was part of a larger tapestry of human struggle, but they also underscored the uncertainty ahead. One day, Lily came to me with a crumpled drawing, a rainbow stretched over a stormy sky. "Mom, this is us," she said quietly. "The storm is scary, but the rainbow is coming." Her words, so simple and pure, broke something open inside me. Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the fear, there was still hope. A fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, the storm would pass. I held that drawing close as I faced the next challenges, the court dates, the emotional confrontations, the deepening cracks in my parents' resolve. It was clear this wasn't just a battle about money. It was about reclaiming trust, rebuilding family, and learning to forgive in a world that often felt unforgiving. As my parents continued therapy, I saw small changes, moments of vulnerability, admissions of guilt, glimmers of remorse, but I also saw the difficulty of breaking patterns ingrained over decades. Addiction is a beast that claws back when you least expect it. One evening, my father showed up at my door unexpectedly. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking. "Laura, I messed up again. I went to the casino yesterday. I'm sorry." The confession shattered the fragile peace I'd been trying to hold. It wasn't just a relapse, it was a test of everything we'd worked for. I felt my heart crack open in two, the part of me desperate to help, and the part screaming to protect Lily from more pain. That night, I lay awake, wondering how many times love could endure such fractures before it broke. Yet even in that darkness, I found a flicker of resolve. This was a battle not just for the past, but for the future. For Lily's future, for my own. I knew I had to find the strength to navigate this labyrinth through anger, through disappointment, through hope. Because some stories don't end with perfect resolutions. They unfold in messy, complicated ways that test our limits and redefine what family means. And this story, our story, was far from over. The night my father confessed, the weight of his relapse pressed down on me like a storm breaking loose inside my chest. The familiar ache of disappointment settled in deep, but beneath it all, something else stirred, an exhaustion, raw and unyielding. I sat on the edge of my bed long after he left, the silence heavy around me, pierced only by the faint hum of the city beyond the window. I knew then that the path ahead was going to demand more from me than I ever imagined, not just as a daughter, but as a mother, as a protector, as a woman who refused to let the past dictate her family's future. The morning came slow and gray. Lily's bright smile was a balm I desperately needed. Her innocence, her unwavering trust, it was both a gift and a responsibility I carried with fierce determination. I couldn't let her world unravel because of the mistakes of those who were supposed to protect her. But as the days wore on, the relapse cast a shadow that seeped into every corner of my life. I found myself second-guessing every phone call, every interaction with my parents. The fragile trust we had begun to build now felt like a house of cards trembling on the edge of collapse. Therapy sessions became battlegrounds of emotions. My parents wrestled with their demons, sometimes breaking down in tears, other times retreating behind walls of denial and shame. I listened sometimes with hope, sometimes with bitter anger. Each revelation was a sting, a reminder of how deep the roots of addiction had grown. One afternoon, my mother reached out, her voice shaky, but determined. "Laura, I know we hurt you. We broke your trust, but I want to fight for our family. Please believe me." Her words were like fragile glass, beautiful, but easily shattered. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe, but years of secrecy had carved scars too deep for words alone to heal. I told her quietly, it's not just about wanting to change. It's about doing the hard work every single day. That conversation lingered with me, haunting my thoughts during quiet moments. Change, I realized, wasn't a switch to be flipped, but a slow, painful journey, one that would test all of us in ways we hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, the legal fight over Lily's college fund dragged on. Court dates loomed like ominous clouds, each bringing fresh anxiety and exhaustion. The financial strain was real, but the emotional toll was even heavier. Every document I signed, every phone call with our lawyer was a reminder that what had been stolen wasn't just money. It was a breach of faith, a wound to our family's foundation. Lily, with her boundless curiosity, sensed the tension, but rarely spoke of it. One evening, she curled up beside me, her small hand in mine. "Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa can really change?" Her question hit me harder than any court ruling. How do you explain addiction betrayal and hope to a child whose world you're trying to keep whole? I pulled her close and whispered, "Sometimes people have to fight really hard to be better. And when they do, it's a kind of magic." She smiled, a glimmer of trust shining through the uncertainty. That moment became a beacon for me, a reminder that amidst the chaos, love still had the power to heal. But healing is never linear. Weeks later, another relapse surfaced, this time more severe. My father missed therapy appointments. Calls went unanswered. The familiar patterns reemerged, dragging us back into the abyss. The betrayal cut deeper than before. I felt anger flare scorching and fierce threatening to consume me. How many chances could one family endure before the ties unraveled beyond repair? I confronted him one evening, voice trembling. "Why, Dad? Why keep doing this to us?" His answer was a broken whisper. "I'm fighting Laura." But sometimes the fight feels too big. I saw the truth in his eyes, the exhaustion, the shame, the desperate hope. And I felt my own resolve harden. This wasn't just about my parents anymore. It was about breaking the cycle, about forging a future where Lily wouldn't have to face these ghosts. I threw myself into building that future. New boundaries were drawn, clear, firm lines protecting Lily and me from the fallout of addiction. I leaned on my aunt, more her steady presence, a lifeline in the storm. I also found strength in unexpected places. Friends who listened without judgment, counselors who offered guidance, and even strangers who shared their stories online. Each connection was a thread weaving a safety net beneath me. Yet the scars remained. Trust once broken is a fragile thing. I watched my parents struggle, sometimes making strides, sometimes faltering. Each moment was a test of their commitment, of my patience, of the resilience of love itself. One night, after a particularly hard day, I sat with Lily and showed her the college fund statement, now restored, though scarred by the battles it had endured. Her eyes sparkled with hope and a hint of worry. "Mom," she said softly, "we're going to be okay, right?" I hugged her tight, feeling the weight of the question settle in my chest. We're going to fight to be okay, together. That night, as I lay awake, the future felt uncertain, but not hopeless. Our family was wounded, yes, but still breathing, still fighting. And in that fragile, precious fight, I found the true meaning of love, not perfect, not easy, but fierce and unyielding. The road ahead would be long. There would be more setbacks, more tears, more moments of doubt, but also moments of grace, healing, and unexpected joy. Because sometimes the most broken families are the ones who show us the greatest capacity to heal. And this story, our story, was far from finished. The mornings came with a fragile hope, like the first light filtering through cracked blinds, soft, tentative, and uncertain. I clung to those small beams of possibility, even as shadows lingered thick and unyielding. The battle we fought wasn't just legal or financial. It was emotional, spiritual, a test of wills and hearts. Every day brought new challenges. My father's promises to stay clean were sincere, but the pull of addiction was relentless, a constant whisper in the quiet moments. I watched my mother grapple with her own demons, sometimes stronger, sometimes slipping into despair. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a battleground where hope and despair collided. Lily, my precious Lily, remained my anchor. Her laughter, her innocent questions, her dreams of college, all reminders of why I couldn't let this darkness define us. I built walls around her, shielding her from the storm. But inside, I was breaking. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation with my parents, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the silence pressing down like a weight. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages from friends' support groups and strangers who had shared their stories. Their pain mirrored mine, but their courage lit a fire within me. I realized then that healing would not come from anger or blame, but from understanding and relentless love. Not easy. Love the kind that waits and hopes despite the scars, but fierce, protective love. As the weeks passed, therapy sessions slowly began to show signs of progress. My parents opened up more their defenses, lowering just enough to glimpse the raw pain beneath. They admitted their fears, their regrets, and most importantly, their desire to change. But healing is a labyrinth, not a straight path. Relapses still happened, moments of weakness that sent ripples of fear through our fragile peace. Each time I was faced with a choice to retreat into bitterness or to stand firm, holding on to the belief that change was possible. One afternoon, I sat across from my father at the kitchen table. His eyes were heavy with shame, but there was something different this time, a quiet determination. "Laura," he said, voice cracking, "I want to be better. For you. For Lily. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to fight." Tears welled up in my eyes. It was a promise, yes, but more than that, it was a plea for forgiveness, a step toward redemption. I reached out and took his hand, feeling the tremble beneath his skin. "We'll get there, together." That night, I tucked Lily into bed and told her a story, not just any story, but our story, one of struggle and hope. I told her about the storms we'd weathered and the rainbows that followed the battles fought in silence and the love that refused to let go. Her small hand found mine and she whispered, "Mom, I believe in our rainbow." Her faith became my compass, guiding me through the darkest nights. But the journey was far from over. The legal fight continued each court date, a reminder that the wounds we carried weren't just emotional but tangible, with consequences that echoed into Lily's future. I poured my energy into creating a new fund for her education, one protected from harm, a symbol of my commitment to shielding her from past mistakes. Setting it up was an act of defiance against the chaos, a declaration that her future belonged to her and her alone. As my parents delved deeper into therapy, I witnessed moments of genuine transformation. My mother, once distant and guarded, began to smile again, her eyes lighter, her steps steadier. My father's battles were harder, but his willingness to face them was real. Still, I knew recovery was not a destination, but a journey, a continuous, sometimes painful process. There would be setbacks, tears, and moments when hope felt fragile. But through it all, I learned that family isn't defined by perfection, but by the willingness to fight for one another, no matter how broken the pieces. This story is ours, a testament to the power of resilience, the complexity of love, and the unyielding hope that even in the darkest times, light can find a way through. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to follow what happens next, how we navigate the challenges ahead, the breakthroughs, the heartbreaks, and the unexpected moments of grace, please subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll uncover the next chapters of healing, forgiveness, and the relentless pursuit of a better tomorrow. Because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful stories, and ours is just beginning.